They saw her standing alone beside the depot gate, her duffel bag slung across one shoulder, her hair tied back in a loose braid. The night was humid, the dim streetlight flickering just enough to paint her shadow on the cracked pavement. To anyone else, she looked ordinary, just another woman waiting for a ride after a long shift. But to the 5 bikers who rolled in from the highway, engines growling like wolves, she looked like easy prey. They circled her slowly, their headlights cutting through the mist, tires crunching against gravel as the leader smirked beneath his helmet. He killed the engine, letting the silence fall heavy. "Where you headed, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed calm, almost too calm, as if she'd seen this scene before and already knew how it would end. The second biker laughed, stepping off his motorcycle. The metallic rattle of a chain echoed through the air. They moved closer, not realizing that the stillness in her body wasn't fear, it was calculation. For years, she'd been trained to read a room in seconds, to count threats before a heartbeat passed. Her instructors used to say she had the quiet of a sniper and the mind of a chess player. In the depot's dim light, her breathing slowed, her pulse steady. 5 attackers, 2 within arm's reach, one hanging back by the bikes, one circling left, one pulling off his gloves like he had all the time in the world. Her stance didn't shift. No wasted movement. The leader tilted his head, mocking her silence, taking one more step forward, and that's when she caught it, the glint of a knife handle at his waist. That was all she needed to see. Her body didn't ask for permission. It simply responded. The shift was invisible, like a predator slipping into focus. Her right hand moved slightly, but not enough for them to notice. Every nerve in her body waited for the moment that would come next. She remembered the words her drill sergeant told her back in training. "When they underestimate you, you've already won half the fight." Those words came back like an echo through time. Her calm expression wasn't a mask. It was control, the kind that unnerves men who thrive on dominance. The leader reached out, maybe to grab her arm, maybe to test how much fear he could taste from her silence. But before his fingers touched fabric, she pivoted. Her hand shot up, locking his wrist and twisting with brutal precision. A sound, sharp, sudden, and final, cut through the night. The chain dropped from the second biker's hand as he blinked, unsure of what he'd just seen. The leader's knees buckled, his weapon clattering to the ground. She didn't step back. She stepped through him, already turning, her weight shifting low, her center steady like she was on the training mat again. The second biker lunged, and she moved before he completed the motion, her elbow driving into his sternum, her palm redirecting his momentum into the gravel. The others hesitated, not out of mercy but confusion. They had seen fights before, but not like this. Not this clean. Not this fast. It was like watching choreography written by instinct and years of repetition. She didn't speak, didn't taunt, didn't make a sound beyond the rhythm of her breathing. Every movement was an answer to a threat, every step a calculation. When the third one came from behind, she sensed him before he touched her. The shift of air, the faint crunch of gravel, enough warning. Her heel came up, connecting with his knee. He dropped, cursing, and she spun, driving her shoulder into his ribs. Pain, confusion, disbelief, it all blurred together for them. But for her, time moved slow, deliberate, like each second stretched out long enough for her to think 3 moves ahead. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was the most powerful advantage anyone could give you. They expected hesitation, she gave them efficiency. They expected panic, she delivered precision. To them, she was a target. To her, they were obstacles. The fourth biker shouted something. Maybe an insult, maybe a command, but it was lost in the chaos. He charged, but by then she had already closed the distance, using his size against him, redirecting his momentum into the depot wall. The sound echoed, metal against flesh, followed by the grunt of air leaving his lungs. The fifth one froze, his hand hovering near his belt. His eyes darted between the groaning figures on the ground and the woman who hadn't even broken a sweat. The night felt colder suddenly, quieter, like the world itself was holding its breath. He muttered something under his breath, a nervous laugh maybe, and backed away. For a brief moment, she looked at the wreckage around her, the fallen men, the scattered bikes, the silence after chaos. But there was no triumph in her eyes, no pride, only awareness. She knew this wasn't about winning a fight. It was about survival, about never letting the world decide what you were capable of. The depot light flickered once more, and in that faint glow, she adjusted her stance, exhaled slowly, and reached for her duffel bag. The night had tested her again, and as always, she had met it without hesitation, without fear, just the same unshakable calm that came from years of being underestimated and proving every single one of them wrong. When the first man hit the ground, instinct, not thought, took over. Her body moved before her mind even had time to label the threat. It wasn't adrenaline, it was muscle memory, the kind forged through repetition, through bruises, through endless drills under sun and rain. In training, they called it the switch, that moment when survival stops being reactive and becomes automatic. She felt that switch flip the second biker lunged. Her breath slowed, her vision narrowed, and everything around her sharpened into clarity. She could hear the scrape of boots, the hitch in someone's breathing, the distant echo of a chain hitting concrete. Every sound was data, every shadow a signal. She had been here before, not in this exact place, but in countless simulations designed to break her limits. The depot became her range, the streetlight her spotlight, and those 5 men, unwitting participants in the test her instructors had spent years preparing her for. She remembered the drills where she was forced to fight blindfolded, relying only on sound and touch. The way her trainers yelled at her when she hesitated, how they'd say, "Your hesitation is their window." There was no hesitation now. Her movements followed a rhythm her body had memorized long before this night. The first strike was control, the second efficiency, the third pure instinct. Her legs absorbed impact, redirected energy, and delivered precision like a machine fine-tuned for chaos. To an onlooker, it might have looked cinematic, almost rehearsed, but for her, it was simply the language of survival, one she had been fluent in since her earliest days of training. Years ago, she had struggled through the obstacle courses that demanded endurance and precision under exhaustion. Back then, she used to think the instructors were cruel, making her repeat takedowns until her arms trembled and her breath burned. But in that moment outside the depot, she understood. Every blister, every bruise, every shouted command from her commanding officers had been shaping her for this night. When the third biker swung wildly, she didn't dodge in panic, she redirected. A parry, a step, a twist, the kind of movement that took hundreds of hours to perfect. Her body knew where his center of gravity was, how much pressure it would take to unbalance him, and exactly where to strike to neutralize the threat without wasting energy. Her brain wasn't guessing. It was executing code that had been written through discipline. Her mind went silent, not empty but focused, the way it did during advanced combat drills. In those moments, she used to describe it as a hum, a stillness at the core of the storm. The world slowed around her while her reactions accelerated. She caught a glimpse of the chain coming toward her from the side, calculated distance and timing in less than half a second, ducked under it, and drove her elbow into the man's ribs. The breath left his lungs with a sound she'd heard countless times in sparring rooms, but it didn't make her pause. One target down meant another was already moving. She shifted her stance, pivoting to keep all threats in her peripheral. Her instructors used to hammer that lesson, never lose sight of the field. Even now, her positioning was textbook perfect, every step measured to keep her from being cornered. The air smelled like oil and dust, and the faint hum of cooling engines underscored the silence between strikes. She didn't need to see their faces to know what they were thinking. The disbelief, the fear disguised as aggression, the desperate attempts to regain control of a situation that had already slipped away from them. She had seen that look before during exercises when overconfident recruits underestimated her. It always followed the same pattern: mockery, surprise, panic. Only this time, it wasn't a drill. These weren't soldiers bound by rules. But that didn't change the outcome. Her reactions were sharper than their intent, her discipline stronger than their rage. The human body reacts differently under threat. Some freeze, some flee, a few fight. But those who have trained for years reach a level beyond all three. They operate. Her breathing stayed even, her hands steady, her mind scanning continuously for movement. She was trained not just to fight, but to think while fighting, to predict patterns, read angles, and use the environment. The depot wall became an ally, the ground a weapon. When one of them stumbled, she guided him into the wall's edge, turning his momentum into his downfall. She remembered her instructor's words echoing, "Use what's there, don't look for what's not." That mindset made her untouchable. Even as the fight dragged into seconds that felt like minutes, fatigue never came. The drills had taught her endurance beyond muscle. It was mental, an unwavering focus that didn't waver under chaos. She could feel her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of motion, controlled and deliberate. Every strike was clean, every dodge precise. No anger, no emotion, just presence. That was the essence of her training, to replace panic with purpose. Her training had stripped away everything unnecessary, leaving only efficiency and willpower. For years, she'd questioned why the instructors pushed her harder than the others, why she was never praised, only corrected. But now, standing in the dim light of the depot, surrounded by chaos she could control, she understood that they weren't preparing her for competition or recognition. They were preparing her for nights like this, moments when instinct would be the only thing between her and the unthinkable, moments when training wasn't just memory, but survival itself. 5 against 1. The kind of odds that usually end fast and ugly. But for her, it was just numbers, patterns, positions. She didn't see 5 men. She saw 5 equations waiting to be solved. Each had a tell, the way their shoulders shifted, the direction of their weight, the rhythm of their movements. Years of training had taught her to read people like blueprints, to know where they would be before they got there. As the first one charged again, fueled more by pride than courage, she moved sideways instead of back, using his own momentum to drag him past her. Her knee came up in a precise strike, not to injure but to disable, followed by a sweep that sent him collapsing before he even realized what had happened. He hit the ground hard, the air leaving him in a single shocked grunt. She didn't look down. She was already calculating the next move. The second one came from behind, louder and angrier. He swung wildly, and she ducked low, her elbow cutting across his abdomen. It wasn't force, it was leverage. She used his motion against him, pulling his balance out from under him. The sound of boots scraping concrete echoed through the night. The third biker hesitated, uncertain now. He'd seen 2 of his friends fall, and the confidence that had brought him here was thinning. That half-second of hesitation was her window. She moved in tight, grabbed his wrist, twisted it, and redirected his arm until he dropped the chain he was holding. The weapon clattered to the ground, a useless piece of metal now. Her palm followed through with a sharp strike to his shoulder, pushing him back into the depot wall. Every action flowed into the next like choreography rehearsed countless times. She wasn't faster than them by nature. She was faster because she'd learned to stop wasting motion. The human reaction time can't be changed much, but efficiency, how quickly you decide and execute. That was her edge. The colonel used to say, "You win the fight in the first 2 seconds, not because you move quicker, but because you decide sooner." She decided instantly. There was no noise in her head, no second-guessing. The bikers fought like men who wanted to dominate. She fought like someone who wanted to end it cleanly. Her precision unnerved them. To them, fighting was chaos. To her, it was geometry. Angles, timing, distance, all connected. She had been trained to fight in close quarters where hesitation meant pain. Here, in the open space of the depot, it felt almost too easy. The fourth man tried a different approach, circling her with his fists raised, testing her movement. She tracked him with her eyes, but didn't turn her body. That was another rule. Don't give away your intent. He feinted left, then lunged right. She caught his wrist, twisted, and stepped forward into him, letting his body fold over her shoulder. The impact rattled through the ground as he hit the pavement. The sound made the last one freeze. He was still standing by his bike, gripping the handlebars tightly like they could protect him. His face had lost its smirk. His eyes darted between his fallen friends and the woman standing motionless under the streetlight, her stance solid, her breathing even. He reached for something on his belt, maybe a knife, maybe just to feel like he still had control, but she had already closed the distance. 3 steps, no wasted effort. She grabbed his wrist before the blade cleared the sheath, pivoted her body, and drove her elbow into his forearm. The knife dropped, spinning once before landing on the concrete. He stumbled backward, shock overtaking anger. She didn't speak. Words were distractions. The fight was a dance she had been trained to lead, and they had walked right into her rhythm. Each one had underestimated her, thinking strength was about size or speed. But strength, she knew, lived in timing and precision. A fraction of a second too early, and a move failed. A fraction too late, and it became dangerous. She lived in that fraction, the space between instinct and decision. Every time one of them swung, she was already inside their guard, already where their strike wasn't. That was the secret, never be where the blow lands. The depot became a map in her mind, every piece of ground measured, every distance accounted for. She didn't just fight them, she controlled the space around them. The leader groaned on the ground, clutching his wrist, while the others hesitated, unsure whether to stand or stay down. She didn't look triumphant or angry. There was no satisfaction in what she was doing, only the same calm precision that had carried her through every combat drill. Her breathing pattern didn't break. It stayed rhythmic, controlled. The years of conditioning had taught her to manage energy, to fight efficiently so that every movement counted. She had been trained not to fight long, but to fight smart. In the field, energy was everything. You conserve it, you win. You waste it, you die. As the seconds passed, the air hung thick with tension. The streetlight flickered again, casting long shadows across the ground where 5 figures lay in varying stages of defeat. She hadn't taken a single unnecessary step, hadn't thrown a single wasted strike. To her, the encounter was over long before they realized it had begun. The difference between them wasn't strength or courage. It was precision, the kind that comes only from years of pushing past fear until instinct becomes discipline and discipline becomes art. When the final echo of movement faded, the night seemed to exhale. The engines were still warm, the air thick with dust and silence. She stood there, motionless, her shadow stretched across the cracked pavement, breathing slow and steady. The calm that followed wasn't the stillness of relief, it was discipline. Her body had just gone through a storm of motion, but inside, there was no chaos, no rush of adrenaline demanding release. Her breathing was controlled, her pulse steady, every muscle returning to neutral like a machine easing back into standby mode. That was what years of training had done to her. It taught her that real power wasn't in the strike, it was in the silence afterward. She had been trained to recover faster than she reacted. Her instructors used to make her stand in silence after every sparring match, no matter how intense. Learn to come down as fast as you rise, they'd say. Calm is the weapon you carry when everything else is taken. Those words came back now as she looked around the depot, the scattered bikes, the faint groans of men who had underestimated her. Nothing about her expression changed. No pride, no anger, no visible emotion. Just that same still composure that unnerved people because it didn't make sense. Most fighters tremble after conflict. Their adrenaline shakes them apart. But not her. Her calm wasn't the absence of feeling, it was control over it. The depot light flickered above her, buzzing faintly, catching the sharp edges of metal and the faint shimmer of sweat along her jawline. She rolled her shoulders once, resetting the tension in her body. Every part of her training had been about moments like this, the transition from chaos to clarity. Anyone can fight when pushed, few can remain still afterward. That was what separated soldiers from survivors. Calm wasn't natural. It was built through repetition, through standing in the aftermath of intensity and learning not to flinch at what you've done. Her mind cataloged everything automatically. She noted who was still conscious, where the nearest exit was, how long until someone might pass by. Even in stillness, her mind didn't stop. But it wasn't racing. It was scanning, methodical. Calm after chaos doesn't mean the absence of awareness. It means a sharpened focus, the kind that allows decisions instead of reactions. She knelt briefly, adjusting her duffel bag, checking for damage, not because she needed to, but because routine steadied her. Routine was structure, and structure was control. In the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere down the street, a door slammed. The world had resumed its rhythm, indifferent to what had just happened. That was always the strangest part, the contrast between violence and normalcy. How the world doesn't pause to acknowledge what you've survived. She didn't expect it to. She had learned that calm wasn't given, it was maintained. In the field, after every mission, after every fight, there was always that still moment. The moment where your body wants to shake, where your mind replays every move, every mistake. But the trained ones don't let it. They steady the breath, drop the heart rate, anchor themselves in silence. That's what she was doing now. The men on the ground began to stir, groaning softly. She glanced at them once, assessing, not with cruelty but calculation. None of them would move soon. Her strikes had been efficient, designed to end conflict, not prolong it. There was no need for words. She didn't gloat or threaten. Calm was her closure. She straightened slowly, lifted her bag, and looked toward the depot gate. The calm wasn't weakness. It was strength refined through countless moments of fear faced and mastered. Every soldier knows that calm isn't born in comfort. It's built in chaos. You earn it by standing in the storm and learning to breathe through it. She remembered her first combat drill, the one that broke her completely. Back then, she'd panicked, lost focus, let emotion control her. The instructor had waited until she'd caught her breath, then said quietly, "When you master calm, you master everything." It had taken her years to understand what that meant. Calm wasn't pretending not to feel. It was learning to feel everything and still move forward with clarity. That was what she carried now, in this empty street, under this dim light, the kind of calm that came from experience, not luck. Her fingers brushed the strap of her duffel, her eyes scanning the horizon. The night had changed tone. What had started as a threat was now stillness. Her presence alone commanded the space, not through dominance, but through restraint. True control wasn't about overpowering others. It was about not being consumed by the aftermath. The bikers had fought with emotion, with anger, with ego. She fought with awareness, with purpose, and now she stood untouched by the chaos that had consumed them. Her breathing remained steady, slow inhales through the nose, steady exhales through parted lips. In training, they used to test her recovery by checking her vitals after combat drills. The goal wasn't how fast she could strike, but how fast she could return to calm. That was the measure of mastery. Tonight, she had achieved that again, not in a controlled environment, but in the unpredictability of real danger. Her calm was earned, not practiced. It was the proof that she could face chaos and not let it define her. It wasn't just physical composure, it was mental sovereignty. Even surrounded by the evidence of what had just happened, she stood centered, detached but aware, composed in a way that few ever achieve. When the colonel arrived at the depot the next morning, the first thing he noticed wasn't the mess of overturned bikes or the faint marks of a fight. It was the silence. The kind that lingers after something powerful has happened. He walked slowly through the gravel, his boots crunching against the faint tracks left behind. There were reports already, witnesses who said a woman had been attacked by 5 bikers and that none of them walked away the same. But the colonel didn't come because of the reports. He came because he knew who it had to be. Only one person he'd ever trained could move with that level of precision, that kind of restraint. When he saw her standing near the depot's side gate, the duffel still slung over her shoulder, he didn't have to ask what happened. He could see it in the way she stood, grounded, calm, centered. The same stillness he had drilled into her years ago, now sharpened by experience. He stopped a few feet away, hands resting behind his back, eyes scanning the ground. "You did this?" he asked quietly, not accusingly, just to confirm what he already knew. She didn't look at him right away. She was staring out past the fence, toward the horizon, where dawn was starting to color the edges of the sky. When she finally turned, her expression was neutral, but her eyes said everything. Focus, awareness, and a faint exhaustion beneath it all. She gave a small nod. No excuses, no explanations. Just acknowledgement. The colonel sighed softly, half in disbelief, half in admiration. 5 against 1, he muttered, glancing at the scuff marks and the faint signs of impact on the concrete. They picked the wrong person. He paced slowly, studying the area like an investigator, noting how clean everything was. No blood, no chaos. Just controlled precision. Every move she made had been intentional, every strike calculated. That was what impressed him most. He had seen fights before, messy, panicked, desperate, but this was something else. This was the kind of control that only comes from mastery. He turned back to her and said, "You didn't just win a fight. You maintained discipline in the middle of one." She didn't answer, just adjusted her grip on the duffel. He remembered the first time he'd met her during training. The quiet recruit who never talked back, never showed off, but absorbed everything like it was oxygen. He used to push her harder than the others, sometimes unfairly so, because he saw something in her that few possessed, the ability to stay calm under pressure. When others would shout or panic, she would breathe. When others reacted with emotion, she reacted with thought. The colonel used to tell his cadets that emotion is the first casualty of discipline. Watching her now, standing tall in the pale morning light, he realized she had learned that lesson better than anyone. "You understand what this means?" he asked finally. She nodded again, not out of arrogance, but acknowledgement of the truth behind his words. "You didn't fight out of anger. That's the difference," he continued. "Most people fight to prove something. You fought to end something. And that's what separates a soldier from everyone else." He looked toward the fallen motorcycles, then back at her. "Do you remember what I told you during your last evaluation?" he asked. She gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. He had told her then, "Control is your greatest weapon, and it will scare people who don't understand it." That was exactly what he was seeing now, the aftermath of control mistaken for power. These men hadn't been defeated by force. They'd been dismantled by discipline. He took a few steps closer, his voice soft but firm. "You've become what we always trained for, a balance of restraint and strength. And it's not something you can teach easily. It's earned the hard way." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The depot was quiet except for the sound of the wind brushing against metal. The colonel studied her face. No visible bruises, no sign of fatigue, but he could sense the weight beneath her composure. He'd seen it before in soldiers who had crossed the line between training and reality. That look of someone who had proven to themselves that everything they learned actually worked when it mattered most. "You kept your calm," he said after a pause. "That's what I wanted to see. That's what makes you different." She didn't respond, just nodded slightly again. The colonel took a breath, the kind of long inhale that carries both pride and worry. He knew what this meant for her future. Once someone proves themselves under real pressure, there's no going back to normal. She had crossed the invisible threshold from theory to experience, and he knew it would change the way she carried herself from now on. "You'll be talked about," he said, looking out toward the horizon with her. "Not for what you did, but for how you did it." He turned back to her, studying her posture, the way her shoulders squared naturally, the way her eyes stayed aware of every sound. He thought about all the cadets he'd trained over the years, how most of them could fight, but few could lead themselves through fear. She was one of the rare ones, the kind who could enter chaos and come out calm, the kind who could turn instinct into discipline. That was the lesson he had spent years trying to teach, and in that quiet moment by the depot, he realized she had finally embodied it. Not through medals or praise, but through control, the kind that doesn't need recognition to be real. When word of the incident reached the base, it spread like wildfire. Stories travel fast among soldiers, especially when they sound impossible. 5 men, trained brawlers, ambushed one woman outside a supply depot, and within 60 seconds, all 5 were on the ground. Some called it luck. Others refused to believe it entirely. But those who knew her didn't need proof. They understood that she was built differently. She had always been the quiet one during drills, the one who stayed after hours to repeat every move until it became second nature. She never sought attention, never tried to prove her worth. But that night, she did more than prove herself. She redefined what it meant to be underestimated. The next morning, as she walked through the base gates, people turned to look. Not because of gossip, but because something about her had changed. There was no swagger, no pride, no trace of triumph. Just a certain stillness, a quiet power that demanded respect without asking for it. She didn't speak about what happened, didn't correct the rumors, or embellish the truth. That silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The colonel had already filed his report, praising her discipline and restraint. But to her, it wasn't about commendations. It was about control, about knowing that when the world tested her, she didn't break, she didn't lose herself, she rose. She remembered the moment after the last biker hit the ground. The world had gone still, her heartbeat slow and deliberate. It wasn't victory she felt. It was something deeper, a sense of affirmation. For years, she had questioned whether her training, her composure, her discipline would hold under real pressure. That night answered it. She hadn't just survived. She had led the moment, owned it, shaped it. And in doing so, she found something she didn't even know she was searching for, a reminder of who she really was. She wasn't just a soldier trained to react. She was a protector, someone whose calm under fire could shift the outcome of any battle. The colonel called her to his office later that week. He didn't lecture or question her judgment. He simply looked at her with the faintest trace of a smile and said, "Now you understand what we meant when we said control is freedom." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. Control wasn't just about mastering movement. It was about mastering fear. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of what people think when you stand alone. She had faced all of that outside the depot and emerged stronger. That realization stayed with her, not as pride, but as purpose. From that day forward, she trained differently. Not harder, not faster, but with a new kind of focus. Every motion had meaning now, every repetition a reminder that discipline saves you when nothing else can. She became a quiet symbol on the base, not because of what she did, but because of how she carried herself afterward. Younger cadets started to watch her during drills, not out of curiosity, but respect. They saw the way she stayed composed even when things went wrong, how she corrected mistakes without frustration, how she never raised her voice yet commanded every room she entered. One evening, while she was finishing her training, a young cadet approached her hesitantly. He asked if the stories were true, if she really took down 5 men by herself. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she handed him a practice baton and said, "Truth isn't what people say. It's what you prove when no one's watching." Then she stepped back and began running the drill with him, guiding his form, correcting his stance, teaching him the same control that had saved her that night. It wasn't about violence. It was about balance, understanding that strength isn't loud, it's steady. Over time, her reputation grew beyond the base. She was invited to teach, to speak, to demonstrate. But even when she stood in front of new recruits, she never told the full story. She didn't need to. Instead, she focused on the lesson behind it. That strength isn't defined by how hard you can strike, but by how calmly you can think when the world turns against you. The depot incident became legend, but to her, it was just a reminder of what discipline could do when tested by chaos. She knew the world was full of people who would underestimate her again, who would look at her and see someone small, quiet, unthreatening. And she welcomed it. Every time someone doubted her, it gave her another chance to show what control really looked like. The colonel's words stayed with her through every mission, every encounter. True strength doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself when you need it most. She lived by that truth now, carrying it not as a memory of what happened, but as a mindset. What happened outside that depot wasn't just a fight. It was a transformation, a turning point where she stopped seeing herself as someone who had to prove anything and started living as someone who already had.